So we have now concluded Act 1 of Romeo and Juliet, where we made our focus characterization. Here at the conclusion of Act 1, and actually in the very beginning of Act 2, the prologue, we are going to make our next focus the structure of poetry. I want you to think back of how we've approached poetry this year. You learned the acronym TPCAST, and you learned how to analyze poetry within this sort of approach. And then as we all went home under quarantine, I sent you a video on the 9 steps to analyzing poetry by Laura Randazzo. And indeed, in both classes, and I think the other class was a little more vocal about it, most of you like the 9 steps to analyzing poetry approach a little bit better than TPCAST. Now, I will say that is probably because TPCAST was sort of constructed or designed to help AP literature students quickly analyze, very intensely analyze poetry under a lot of pressure, because they then needed to take that analysis and write an essay. And the test is timed, as you know. And so I think the 9 steps of analyzing poetry actually feels a little more laid back. It's not as intense, and yet there are a lot of overlaps. Both approaches have a lot of the same elements, because indeed they were both just designed by teachers to say, students, here are some tools to help you understand poetry. Now, I think that what is unique about the 9 steps of analyzing poetry is that it's consistent throughout our school building. As I listened to my daughter's lesson taught by Miss Pantaleone, she uses that same approach. She and I share an affinity for Laura Randazzo's work as an English teacher, and so she actually taught them the 9 steps to analyzing poetry that you learned in that video. So all of this to say, you may use either TPCAST or the 9 steps to analyzing poetry, whichever one that you like better. But in both, one of the elements that you need to look at is structure. In TPCAST, it's not as clear. If you look at the directions in shift, you will see it addresses structure. It addresses looking at stanzas and different divisions in poetry. Whereas Laura Randazzo fleshes it out a little more clearly. She identifies it a little more clearly. In any case, we're really going to focus in today, and indeed that is our learning goal. We'll talk about that in just a minute. We're going to focus on structure. I have a picture of 2 houses here so that we can kind of understand what structure in poetry does for us. It provides us reliable conventions and the knowledge of how poets operate under these conventions, in the same way that there are reliable conventions in the structures of houses. For example, we can know that inside both of these homes that we can see in these images, the inside is hollowed out. There is space in there for inhabitants to live. We can know that there is an entryway, a way into both of these homes. There is a roof over the heads of the inhabitants that live in both of these homes. And these homes contain, somewhere inside would be a place to rest. So though these homes are extremely different, quite varied in their characteristics, there are certain reliable elements that we know in any house we can imagine will be part of the home. In the same way, there are certain reliable elements in structures in poetry that, since we know about them, we can understand that poets will be using these structures to communicate meaning for us. I think another really good way of thinking about it is the paragraph. We know how paragraphs are built. We know how houses are built. We know how paragraphs are built. We can know how poems are built. In paragraphs, we know that if we want to quickly gain meaning, we can look at the topic sentence. And there is going to be some kind of information that helps us understand what the rest of the paragraph is going to be about. We know that the main ideas are going to be listed within that grouping, that paragraph, and we know that there is going to be a concluding sentence that will sort of sum up that paragraph. And that helps us to be able, having that information enables us to get meaning from a paragraph. And so understanding the structure of poetry will help us to get meaning. So the learning goal for today is that students will recognize and evaluate structure in poetry. So you'll just be able to recognize it. You'll be able to say, this is a standard. This is a stanza. This is a meter. This is the type of meter in this particular line. Here's the rhyme scheme. You will understand, you will recognize and know those structures, and then you'll be able to use that to gain meaning. That's what this second learning goal is about. You will be able to chunk the text, grouping it into the lines that make sense, and know how poets build meaning into those lines in the same way that a paragraph, there's meanings organized a certain way. You'll be able to recognize those shifts. And again, a lot of times you're using language like transition words like and but and yet, but you can use stanza divisions sometimes to help find the shift as well. And so in all of this, you're going to interpret how that form that poets operate within informs meaning. They will use certain conventions of organization to put their meaning. And so if you understand those organizations, it will help you derive meaning from the poems. Today specifically, we want to look at the sonnet. And so here are the things that you need to put down in your literature notebook concerning the sonnet. It is a 14-line poem. So basically, you can approach poetry and you can count the lines right off the bat, and you can know that you are dealing with a sonnet or you are not. Now, if you have 14 lines, there has to be other elements present to make sure that it is a sonnet. But that sort of, you can begin your sorting or your determining whether you are reading a sonnet based on that first characteristic. Then you'll find that it is an iambic pentameter. And you're going to watch another video in a few moments to further flesh that out. We've already talked about it this year, but I feel that Laura Randazzo delivers it so effectively. I can't let you miss out on that. I need you to watch her teaching on iambic pentameter. I feel like it will transcend this year and you will remember it going on into the future. Sonnets have certain reliable rhyme schemes. There are some variations in these rhyme schemes, but if you understand these first few that I identify for you, then the variations will be very close. The first one is the English sonnet, or the Shakespearean sonnet, and it is as follows, but I won't read it to you. You could pause it if you need to. The second is the Italian sonnet. You can see a little bit different here. So it's 14 lines, written in iambic pentameter, but look at the difference in the divisions based on the rhyme scheme. And again, I won't name it off for you. So your first sonnet that you approached in the play was the prologue, and we did identify that, and you did analyze that. But I just want to show you that. So this should look very familiar because you've already read this and analyzed it. But I just wanted to break it up and show you that rhyme scheme because that's something that you may not have focused on. Okay, I want to very quickly, I'm trying really hard, guys, to do this quickly for you, but I want to show you how you identify rhyme scheme. And so you just take the first line and you assign it the letter A, and then you do not give the next word the same letter unless it rhymes. If this were a rhyming word for dignity, you would give it an A as well, but it's not, so you assign it a B. But as you come to this third word at the end of the third line, you see that it rhymes with dignity. It's mutiny, so you assign it A again. You come to the fourth word, and it is the word unclean that rhymes with seen, so you give it a B. In this line, foes doesn't rhyme with either of these, and so you assign it a C. And then life doesn't rhyme with any of the preceding words, so you assign it a D. But then you find a rhyming word for foes, so you assign it the same letter C, and so on. The only other thing I wanted to point out, and maybe this just bothers me as a reading teacher, because the rhyming done on the lower elementary level is very pure. So life and strifed, that does not rhyme that completely. But we're going to take some liberties. Poets are going to take some liberties in literature in making rhyme scheme. It's going to be able to be close. And same thing here, love and remove do not rhyme, but they are I rhymes. They both end in OVE, and so close enough, we're calling it a rhyme, okay? If Shakespeare says it's a rhyme, it's a rhyme. All right, and then down here, very important to the Shakespearean sonnet, the English sonnet, is the couplet that rhymes at the end of the 14 lines. Different from if you go back, the Italian sonnet doesn't end that way. A couplet is 2 lines in which both words at the end rhyme. And they often, this is what I want to drive at, guys, they often, within the structure of this couplet, this rhyme scheme that goes together at the end here, it's tight. It's a little couplet that's just kind of tight group language because of that. It's like the rhyme, the rhyme at the end kind of ties it all together tightly, and within that couplet also is a lot of meaning. Okay, so that's what I'm trying to drive at here, is that this, you can group, you can chunk the lines based on things like stanzas, based on things like rhyme schemes, and you can find related meaning within those chunks. I hope that makes sense. Now, that was the first sonnet. The third sonnet you're going to analyze today is the prologue in Act 2, the very beginning. That's all you're going to do is look at that prologue. And then the second one you might have missed because you already read it. Do you know where it was? It's at the very end of Act 1. It is in scene 5. And guys, if you missed it, it's because it was a conversation between Romeo and Juliet. And so Shakespeare, he's the expert, right? He is amazing. What does he do? He creates a sonnet in dialogue. And so I'm not going to have you analyze this one, but you might just want to pause this right now and read it again and appreciate it for the fact that it in itself is a poem. It is a sonnet. Look at its rhyme scheme. There's a lot of imagery, beautiful imagery in this. It's religious imagery. And the reason for Shakespeare using this religious imagery in this piece is to communicate, to have Romeo communicate to Juliet, Juliet, I love you with a pure love. I have good intentions for us. And you see that as the play goes on, they're going to get married. And then it's all going to fall apart at the end because it's a tragedy, but you know what I mean. And so appreciate this for the fact that it is a sonnet. But for today, we are going to move on. And I want you to view Laura Randazzo's video on the Shakespearean sonnet for just a few more elements of information and just for the effectiveness of that video. And then I want you please to do a TP cast or the 9 steps on the sonnet from Act 2, Scene 1 to get us started into this next act. In that, I want you please to highlight the rhyme scheme then. You saw how you can do that. You can assign it the letters. You can highlight it in a different color. You can print this out if you want. I want you to mark the iambic pentameter in the first stanza. I'm going to make that optional because I realize right now that if you don't print it out, if you want to do it online and not print it out and literally annotate right on the piece, that you won't be able to do that. I'll let that be your choice. But then circle the couplet. You could highlight the couplet. You can also annotate, you can do the iambic pentameter because you can use the letter U and an accent mark that your computer has over the lines. And that's why I'm only having you do one stanza. But in any case, oh, and some of you, I think you have pens to use on your iPad.